Tape is an episode that I've definitely been hyping up for a bit, that I've been very excited to talk about. It's one of my personal favorites. I don't feel like it gets the recognition it deserves. It's a very underrated episode for sure. I definitely really enjoy this episode. It's one of my favorites. The main storyline here, of course, is who left this erotic, very sexual message on Jerry's tape recorder. Jerry likes to record his shows, tape record them with his new material to, just to review and see what works, what didn't work, and, all that jazz, just to, review his shows, which is, a good idea. And the second storyline, of course, is George seeing that thing about this Chinese doctor, Zhang Zhao, who has a hair cream to discover a cure for baldness, which Jerry just does not believe in at all whatsoever. And also, of course, kind of like a lingering storyline, of course, here is Kramer, who who's just got a new video camera. I forgot where he got it from. I think some inspector gave it to him or whatnot. But at the end of the episode, because it was referenced, of course, later, when they were making random conversation. But at the beginning of the episode, George was asking Jerry if he ever did this bit he suggested to him about the big toe being the captain of the toes, which really didn't get much of a reaction whenever the crowd did it. Whenever he said in front of a crowd. Of course, this would come back later because it was mentioned later on as just a random thing there to a different member of the cast. But they would start off with that. At the same time, there was this repairman there working on Jerry's refrigerator that was obviously shows again Jerry really has no interest in making conversation with a stranger. I mean, look what happened in the note. He basically rubbed no pun intended, rubbed that masseuse the wrong way but when they're talking about that child abduction in Pennsylvania. But while listening to it, all of a sudden, while that's all going on, Jerry's like, oh my goodness. He's listening to his tape recorder, and some woman left some very, erotic, seductive sounding message on his tape recorder. And, George and Kramer even listened to it, and it's like, holy moly, it was, one of the best things they've ever heard of. So, the next day, Jerry's at a restaurant at Monk's with George and Elaine, and Jerry, of course, asks Elaine for her opinion on the ball cure. Which, of course, first George thinks Jerry talked about the message on the tape recorder, but he said no. And obviously, while Jerry acting arguing over what he actually meant, Elaine's sitting there obviously with this look of face oh that. Until Jerry saw an old friend that he went over to talk to. So Elaine's asking George, so what do you think of this message? It was sexy? You love it? This to this? How she sound like? And George describes she had this very sexy, throaty kind of whisper. And then Elaine goes, really, Jerry, I want to slide my tongue around you like a snake. Oh. And she's back and just has this big grin on her face. At the same time, George was looking at the menu and he peeks over. He's just Elaine's yep, you're right. And then George was like, holy Moses. He's like, that was you? And of course, Elaine's like, keep it down. I don't want him to know yet. She tells him that she had stopped by to see Jerry do his act the other night. And when she was backstage and she saw the tape recorder and she just, just got the impulse and just wanted to fool around. Which, of course, Elaine's like, it was no big deal. It was just a joke. She's trying to rub it off. And then George, was like, nuh-uh, this ain't a joke. You really, got his attention. He was quite turned on by that. And, of course, Jerry obviously was trying to figure out who it was. Of course, George knew who it was, but obviously he knew Jerry was going to get nothing out of it. But George thought he may have a shot here. So Jerry comes back over, and George is just, super distracted and just mesmerized that it was that he knows who it is, but obviously it's Elaine. But obviously George has no shot because again, it's Elaine. Remember back in a few episodes ago when we were at the dog and they were talking about how the both of them like really had nothing to talk about when Jerry wasn't around except for making fun of Jerry. Well, when I referenced that would all change, of course, because this episode, George wanted Elaine. He wanted her. Like, he was the one out of the three of them when they all knew who the message was, that he definitely was the most turned on for sure. So Elaine asks, Jerry gets back, what about the woman in the tape recorder? And he says, he's going to try to figure out whose number it was. And then, of course, Elaine's leaving, and George was like, interested in, like, where are you going? She's like, I'm going home. What are you going home for? And then she goes, well, I just came from the gym, and I need to take a shower. And then she asks Jerry, can I take a shower at your place? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then George just takes that napkin, he's like, filled his forehead, like, hot. Obviously, he was in a sauna, for crying out loud. He was so turned on. So when I go back to the place, while Elaine's in the shower, George listens to the episode, is like, oh my gosh, oh man, like, how great it is. But when Elaine comes out, obviously he takes the headphones out because, Elaine knows that George knows. He doesn't want to freak out Elaine, even though the fact that deep down he's just like, holy smokes. So Jerry was making some phone calls, trying to figure out, of course, who it was. So then Kramer, of course, comes in with his camera, and then they start joking or playing around, and Elaine basically says, and basically by pretending that, like, Elaine was auditioning for some porno. Elaine does the Upper West Side, and then she just jags around saying, while George is on the phone with that hair clinic in China trying to place an order for that hair cream. In the meantime, he's distracted by Elaine, but he's also like freaking out on the phone because nobody speaks English. He's like, English! Does anybody speak English? Nobody speaks English, damn it! And he's just freaking out about it, but at the same time, Elaine's calling George as a joke on camera, her co-star, and then Kramer asks, so Elaine, in the movie, is the sex real or is it simulated? And she's like, oh, it's always simulated, except for George. That's in my contract. Which, of course, obviously, George just loved. Of course, finally, Kramer had ordered some Chinese food. This is the first appearance we got of the delivery boy, Peyton, who would appear in a couple episodes. George then sees Ping and he says, yeah, you speak Chinese, right? He's like, yeah, I do. And then George asks him if he could talk to China on the phone and place an order with them. And then Ping starts talking in Chinese. Obviously, it sounds like he hit it off or whatnot. And then George is like, they got 1 billion people over there, and he found a relative. And basically, they were saying, he says, like, if you send money, they send cream. And he's like, okay, this is a real thing. This is not a scam. And he asks him if there's any side effects. And Ping asks them. And then he goes, impotence. And George is like, what? No. And then, obviously, he was just playing a joke. So, once they get the money, it'll be 3 days after they receive the check. He's like, okay, perfect, thank you, and whatnot. So George's excited. So Ping, of course, obviously this is a long distance call. So Ping just sits down on the couch, starts making like casual conversation. The audience is laughing their heads off for like a long period of time, which it's very, like, you have moments in your life where it's like for example, for me, years ago when my uncle was alive. My dad and his two brothers, which one of them was my recently deceased uncle, would go on like a little bit like a weekend guide trip like once a year. And one year, my uncle arrived and he had not done a good job packing his clothes. So he pulled out the ironing board and ironed his clothes. But he didn't realize he had to pull the ironing board up. He just laid it flat on the ground, laid his shirt out on top of the ironing board, was on the ground, and it's like leaning over, like standing on his feet, like bending over, ironing, and he's going, oh yeah, Mickey, this is just what no one does low board irons. He goes, I see this everywhere in the many hotels I've gone to. My dad's on the side just like Steve, just stop. cracking up, and he just raises the ironing board. He's like, how do you do that? But in the midst of like him like explaining to my dad about how he's seen it, like if that was in a sitcom, obviously the audience would be laughing for like a good like 15-20 seconds, and we're seeing like the person's supposed to be saying the next line, like Jerry to tell Ping, you kind of gotta get off because it's an expensive call. Just waiting for that long payoff, which was just hilarious. But then George, then of course, since he's attracted to Elaine, wants to impress her, he offers to drive her home. And he gets there and he's just like, oh yeah, you can just go inside. And Elaine's like, oh, I mean, do you want to do something? Obviously, George wanted to do something, all right. He mentions, of course, like, it's like, I thought you were very funny in that porno. And she's like, oh, I was just kidding around. He's like, I know, but I thought what you said about the sex not being simulated, that was very funny. And she's like, yeah, it was funny. So then George was not going where he says, okay, yeah, we basically let her go. She gets out of the car, and George is literally like leaning on that window, gasping for air, like he was just in a song. He's like, like he was so turned on. But then the next day, Jerry was on the phone with a few people, and he found out the name of a woman who was sitting in the front row next to his tape recorder. So they assumed that she was the one who left that breathy message. So Jerry got her number, and then George came over. He wanted to show Jerry the hair cream and prove him wrong that that Jerry has no reason to be skeptical. So Kramer goes and grabs his camera, and he says, "Let's do a before and after picture. That way we can see as the hair grows." So they film the hair, his bald head. George puts the cream on, but it smells so bad. It stunk. It really stunk. And of course that goes on with the whole "you stink," which apparently this story about the hair cream came from Larry David in real life doing the same thing, and then Kenny Kramer telling Larry David that he smells bad. And George had it on until Elaine calls saying she was going to be dropping by, and of course, George, takes the cream off because obviously he doesn't want to look good in front of Elaine. Until Elaine calls back and says that that she can't come. She couldn't come over. She had too much to do. In the midst of all this, though, also while George's going back and forth, Kramer asks Jerry how often does he cut his toenails, and he says every 2.5 to 8 weeks. And Kramer mentions the other night he was sleeping with Marion, which I'm assuming he was referring to the librarian. And he says he hadn't cut his nails for a while, and he accidentally cut Marion's ankle with the big toe while they were sleeping together the other night. And then, of course, Jerry tries to just the whole big toe cap and the toes thing, which Kramer didn't find entertaining. Of course, after Jerry gets off the phone with Elaine, who says that she can't come over, and George is just like, oh, great, so now I put the hair cream back on. So then Jerry calls the number he got through, who he thinks was the woman who left the breathy message on the phone, goes on a date, gets home. Kramer, of course, hears him from home and wants to know details. But Jerry goes, at the end of the night, I go to make a little move, I get the pullback. He's like, this woman said the filthiest things to me, and yeah, I get the pullback. So Kramer thought he blew it, but George then thought this woman was psychotic, and Kramer wanted to have the number and talk to her. And then Jerry's like, I'm not giving you the number. He's like, I know how to handle these, but it's not happening. So then the buzzer goes off, and he's like, huh? And then George is coming by. And he's confused, like, what's he doing here? And then George comes in wearing this sheriff's hat, this ridiculous looking hat, and Jerry's like, sheriff, posing, and he's like, not for real. And then he goes, what's with the hat? And then, of course, George pulls down the hat, and he has the hair cream on. And then, of course, George pulls the hat off, and he reveals he has the hair cream on. And, of course, Kramer has to go, boy, you stink. Of course. And then George wanted to talk to Jerry, which obviously is about the thing with Elaine. Because he needed to be open with honest with them. And then Kramer's looking at George's head to see if there's any result, but he's like, uh-oh, I think I see something. He goes, let's go to the video videotape. So while Kramer's running over there, and this whole last scene, they had a hard time. There was so many bloopers. So I think what happened was Kramer ran over there, and George is like, I can't tell you now. Kramer's gonna be back here in a few seconds. Like, no, he'll be over for like a half an hour. What's going on? George flat out just says it. I become attracted to Elaine. And then in comes Kramer with the camera, and Jerry, of course, is already like stunned by this. And then Jerry's asking, he needs to talk to George alone. About what? And Kramer's like, and George's like, Jerry's like, it's kind of private. And Kramer's like, what? Like the big toe captain? And George gets a little aggravated, saying, is it about the bid? And he goes, hey, fine, I'm going to take a look at this. He wanted to look at the before and after tape to see if there was and reveal if there was any hairs grown in it at all, which Kramer thinks he actually sees something. But then in the blooper reel, when Kramer went to leave, he accidentally broke a piece of the tripod off as he's exiting, which caused erupted laughter. And the two of them Jerry and George are trying to get through this scene, but they both just kept cracking up laughing at breaking character. Finally, one of my favorite bloopers. Well, this is also my favorite bloopers, which is again why I love this episode, especially this scene. So finally, Jerry asks George, "You're attracted to Elaine?" He goes, "I know, I can't function, I can't sleep," and they just start busting out laughing. And then to cap it all off, this is from the blooper sequence. Jason Alexander accidentally sat on that ridiculous-looking sheriff's hat and squashed like, my hat! And as they toss up to the side, they both fall on the floor and just start busting out laughing. So, but of course, obviously, and from these bloopers, they obviously cut some things out. So it wasn't Jerry asking, "You're attracted to Elaine?" And they cut it to Jerry going, "Does she know?" And Jerry's like, George's like, "No." Why not? Because I can't say, because I promised her. I said, no, she doesn't. But how would she know then? Because she asked me to. And he's like, what's this, an Abbott and Costello routine? And finally, George reveals that the reason why is because Elaine told him that she was the one who left the message on the tape. And then Jerry's like, what? That's Elaine? And then George is like begging Jerry to listen. For him to listen to it. He's like, no. It's my ex-girlfriend. I should have preference. And George is like, oh, yeah, now really. So obviously it leads to them fighting. And then the buzzer goes off. And again, it's Elaine. And she's like, is this a bad time? But of course, this was before, I guess they put a new hat in. Because George like throws that hat on and runs into the other room to wipe off that hair cream. And then Elaine's like, hi, is this a bad time? Again, she wanted to have a little fun with this, but finally she had enough and says, I need to talk to him before something bad happens. So Elaine comes in, and he's like, something stinks in here. And then George comes out, and he's like blaming it on Jerry. So originally, Elaine was supposed to say, I gotta talk to you about before something very embarrassing happens, but she kept like cracking up and just like, couldn't get through the scene. So basically, they cut it out. And they said what's going on. And Elaine went straight to saying, I was the one that talked into your tape recorder. And Jerry's like, yeah, I know, George told me. And then Elaine's like, what, you told him? Like, he threatened to. And then Jerry's like, where did you come up with all that? Like, basically, again, like, I didn't know you were made of all of that. And Elaine's like, it was just a joke. And then George is like, Elaine, I gotta be open and tell you something. Jerry's like, no, don't do it. And George goes, I'm very into you, basically. And Jerry's like, no. But of course, Elaine never really responds to it. Kramer runs in going, I found the hair. And then George starts trying to explain to Elaine, ever since you told me you were the one on the tape. And then Kramer's like, whoa, hold the phone here. That was you? And Elaine's like, guys, it was a joke. And then Kramer just like throws the headphones on the tape. He's like, oh yeah. Elaine, I can't believe that is you. And then there's this sequence there where it's like they show a close-up of each of the three of them. Kramer and Jerry were just like, oh my gosh. They're not being obvious like, I wish I could have that. George was like, maybe, come on. And then Elaine's like, I gotta get out of here. But they're like, we'll stick around for a while. It's early. We'll order Chinese. And Elaine just exits, and then the three of them start fighting over that tape again. But of course, they were just laughing at the reactions when they did the scene for the blooper reel, of course. And as you know, Elaine's just laughing. She's like, I gotta go. And there's like, stick around a while. And then Jerry uses very high pitch. It's early. Oh, it's such a good episode. Such a good episode. Like I said, I talked for 20 minutes for this episode. It is such a good episode. Again, I feel like it's one that does not get the recognition. It's overshadowed by, like, ones like, you know, the contest, the parking garage, the finale, the yada yada, the opposite, so many others that is overshadowed by, like, this is one of the more underrated episodes. Like, if there was, like the hidden gems of Seinfeld, this definitely one of them. Again, this is just so good. Like, again, can you tell that I love this episode? I mean, the interesting twist of, like, you know, of, like, infatuation between, you know, two of the main characters, well, more so just one-sided, of course. I don't know, it was just so well done, well played. The bloopers were outstanding. Again, that one still with Jason Alexander sitting on the hat just burns in my memory and just cracks me up. But definitely, again, one of my favorite episodes, for sure. And it was very well done, I gotta say. So guys, I talked a little bit longer than usual, but that is my thoughts on the tape. Again, one of my personal favorites, and a very underrated and not as appreciated episode of Seinfeld as it should be. So guys, what are your thoughts on the tape? Please be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Slap a like on the video. Subscribe for more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter at DemandAirboy93. Till then guys, I'm checking out. I'll see y'all soon. Next time I think is the nose job. Yeah, the nose job is next. So till then guys, I'll see you when I talk about the nose job. Peace out everybody. Yeah.